Chapter 7 of the Fall River Tragedy by Edwin H. Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. A Reward Offered. On the morning after the tragedy the following notice was sent to the newspapers. $5,000 reward. The above reward will be paid to anyone who may secure the arrest and conviction of the person or persons who occasioned the death of Andrew J. Borden and his wife. Signed, Emma L. Borden and Lizzie A. Borden. Here was an incentive calculated to invigorate the work of those who were bent on solving the great mystery. But the police officers did not stop to read this announcement. It was as plain as a pikestaff that they were not devoting their entire time and energies toward hunting up farm hands, mysterious Portuguese and Westport horse traders. Yet it is an unquestionable fact that City Marshal Hilliard left no stone unturned to follow every clue of this kind to its end. They all ended in smoke. The hatchets which had been found in the cellar had been sent off to Professor Wood for critical examination, and the public awaited with almost breathless anxiety the making of his report. Upon it depended much which would assist in clearing up the case. After the bodies had been placed in the receiving vault at Oak Grove, Mr. Morse concluded to bury the clothing which the victims wore at the time of death. He employed men to do the work. Under orders the clothing was interred in the yard back of the barn. Just after this incident, Mr. Morse locked the barn door with two Boston reporters on the inside, and when they demanded their release he found considerable fault with the liberties people were taking on the premises. He was reminded that a reward of $5,000 had been offered, and that therefore everybody was intensely interested. On the same afternoon Andrew J. Jennings, an astute lawyer and a conservative man, who had been employed by the Misses Borden as before stated, was questioned about the case. He had no particular desire to talk about the family affairs of the Bordens, but he admitted that as far as he knew, the murdered man left no will. The estate would, as a matter of course, go to the daughters. As to the crime itself, Mr. Jennings said, "I have read many cases in books, in newspapers, and in fiction, in novels, and I never heard of a case as remarkable as this. A most outrageous, brutal crime, perpetrated in midday in an open house on a prominent thoroughfare, and absolutely motiveless. The theory advanced, these quarrels about wages and about the possession of stores and that sort of thing, are simply ridiculous. They do not offer a motive. If it was shown that the thing was done during even such a quarrel, in the heat of passion, it would be different. But to suppose that for such a matter a man will lie in wait or steal upon his victim while asleep, and hack him to death is preposterous. Even with revenge in his heart, the sight of the victim asleep would disarm most any man. Then for a man to enter, commit the deed and escape without being discovered would be a remarkable combination of circumstances." In answer to a question as to what he thought about the possibility of the murder being committed by a member of the family, he replied, "Well, there are but two women of the household and this man Morse. He accounts so satisfactorily for every hour of that morning, showing him to be out of the house, that there seems to be no ground to base a reasonable suspicion. Further than that, he appeared on the scene almost immediately after the discovery, from the outside, and in the same clothes that he had worn in the morning. Now it is almost impossible that the frightful work could have been done without the clothes of the person who did it being bespattered with blood. Then came Lizzie Borden, dressed in the same clothes she wore before the killing. This, together with the improbability that any woman could do such a piece of work, makes the suspicion seem altogether irrational." Complication after complication arose as the facts in the case slowly came to light. Not a scream nor a groan was heard coming from the Borden house that morning. Neither did the family living in the Buffington house, which stands next north of the Borden house, see anybody coming out on that morning except Mr. Borden himself. He left his home, as had been stated, about 9 o'clock. Mrs. Churchill, who lives with her mother, Mrs. E. P. Buffington, across the yard, watched Mr. Borden go out. There is a fence between the two houses, and Mrs. Buffington's kitchen windows look over the fence into the Borden yard, directly opposite the side door, and not 28 feet from the Borden house. The barn is but 20 feet behind the house, and the distance from the east end of the house to the east end of the barn is not more than 50 feet. Behind the barn is a fence 8 feet high, protected by barbed wire. This fence divides the Borden estate from that of Dr. J. B. Chagnon, whose house fronts on 3rd Street. On the rear of Dr. Chagnon's place are half a dozen apple and pear trees that stand up against the fence which partitions the Borden estate from that of Dr. Chagnon. On the south side of the Borden house is Dr. Kelly's residence. A low fence stands between. Miss Addie Cheetham lives with her mother and Mrs. Churchill with Mrs. Buffington. All these persons were about their own houses all of Thursday morning. Miss Cheetham sat writing a letter at 10 o'clock, and at 10:55 went to the post office. She saw no one come out of the Borden house during the time she sat near the window fronting on the Borden lawn. She could hear the side door bang if it opened at all, but it did not, she says. Mrs. Churchill was about the house until 10:15, when she went to the market to secure dinner. She returned about 10:50, and it was perhaps 25 minutes later when she had occasion to go into the kitchen. She looked out of the window, and just at that moment Lizzie Borden pushed open the side door of her own house. Mrs. Churchill ran over to Mrs. Borden's, and just at that minute Bridget, who had been sent to summon Dr. Bowen, returned, saying that she could not find the doctor. Mrs. Churchill went over to Lew Hall's sail loft, where her hired man, Tom Bolles, was talking, and asked him to run for Dr. Chagnon. Bolles ran around the square to find the Chagnon house locked up. The family had that day gone to Pawtucket, and the hired girl was down street from 10:30 until nearly 12 o'clock. Bolles came back, and while running up 2nd Street saw Dr. Bowen driving in front of his office, and then it was that the family physician was notified. Bolles saw Bridget cleaning windows on the north and west side of the house early in the forenoon, but she was not in sight at 11:20. All the members of the Buffington household agreed that if there had been any scream from inside the Borden house, it would certainly have been heard by them. In Dr. Kelly's yard some men were working, and if the assassin proceeding on the theory that a man attempted to escape the fence at that place, he would perhaps have been seen by the laborers. He would also have to pass the barn where Lizzie was, provided, of course, he got out of the house between 10:55 and 11:20. If he jumped over the Buffington fence, he might have been seen by the inmates of the house, and to try to escape by cutting his way over the Kelly fence would have been to fall into the hands of the laborers. It would have been dangerous for him to go out by the 2nd Street entrance, for there are always passers by on this thoroughfare as well as on 3rd Street. Clues are absolutely indispensable adjuncts to all criminal operations, and in the Borden case they were omnipresent. Everybody seemed to have a suggestion to offer. Around the police headquarters there congregated all kinds of men, including a number of cranks. Those of the latter class who could not report in form sent in their contribution by mail until Marshal Hilliard's desk was piled high with curious and original documents. But the police themselves worked night and day and kept their doings as secret as possible, under the circumstances. Before 2 days passed, the press all over the country began to assail the work of the officers, and it was kept up with a vigor worthy a better cause. Undoubtedly, this criticism was brought about by the fact that the 25 or more newspaper men who interviewed the Marshal daily, or said they did, gleaned the fact that he harbored the suspicion that a member of the family had committed the crimes. But it was clear to all who wished to see it, that he paid as much attention to hunting down outside clues as he did in pursuing his inquiries in the other direction. The more plausible clues were diligently followed. A theory which gave promise of good results was as follows. On Tuesday before the murder, about 9 o'clock in the morning, a horse and buggy turned into 2nd Street out of Spring Street and came to a halt in front of the Borden house. A young man who was employed near by sat in his buggy, which stood opposite the house and was facing south. He took the trouble to watch closely the two men who occupied the buggy. One of them got out and rang the doorbell. Mr. Borden answered the call and the stranger was admitted. In about 10 minutes he came out and resumed his seat in the buggy, and the pair drove off in the direction of Pleasant Street. This circumstance was considered of importance when it became known that the police had information of another person who had seen a strange man about the premises. A boy named Kerouac, at the time of his trip down Second Street. This man gave a most rigid examination by the police, and he stuck to his story. This clue was effectually disposed of by the authorities, who found another person who was with Kerouac at the time of his trip down Second Street. This man gave a particular story of his movements that morning and denied that young Kerouac had seen a suspicious character. Adjoining the yard of the Borden place is the house occupied by Dr. Chagnon. On the evening in question the physician was unexpectedly summoned away and asked Dr. Collet if, as a favor, he would allow the latter's little son to attend to the telephone during Dr. Chagnon's absence. The boy was absent and Dr. Collet sent his daughter to Dr. Chagnon's residence, but upon her arrival the doctor had departed and the office was locked. The little girl decided to await the arrival of someone and sat down in the yard for that purpose. Soon the man who had driven the doctor away returned, and the office was opened. Miss Chagnon remained in the yard adjoining the Borden place. She was there at the time it was alleged the unknown man jumped the fence, and she declares that she saw no one attempt anything of the kind. But the fact that there was a considerable extent of barbed wire along its top was submitted in answer. Barbed wire necessitates careful handling, and it was argued in support of the truth of the girl's statement and the falsity of the other story that the passage of a man over such a barrier would require such time as to render detection possible. Notwithstanding the fact that Mr. Morse had clearly established an alibi, there were those who insisted that he knew more of the murder than he had made public. Proceeding on this theory, the officers took up the task of investigating Mr. Morse. Officer Medley was given the work, and in company with Inspector Hathaway of the New Bedford police, he discovered that Mr. Morse had lived, as before stated, in Dartmouth. There was at that time a camp of itinerant horse traders in the town of Westport. It was related that Mr. Morse had had dealings with these men, and the sensational press soon coupled his name with a possible hired assassin, a member of the gang of traders. This story was given color by the then unexploded story of young Kerouac, especially when it became known that Officer Medley had discovered a man who seemed to fit the description of the stranger alleged to have been seen around the premises. This suspect was the head trader in the Westport camp, and when accosted he readily consented to come to Fall River and surrender himself. He succeeded in showing beyond a reasonable doubt that he was in the city of New Bedford at the time of the Borden murders. Within a few hours after the murder was reported, a detail of police was sent to guard the house. The policy was kept up for more than a week, and as early as Friday morning the officers on guard had instructions to keep the Misses Bordens, John V. Morse and Bridget Sullivan, under the strictest surveillance, and not allow either of them to leave the city. If they left the premises they were followed. The medical examiner, the marshal, and the officers at work on the case were constantly coming and going about the house, and while it may have appeared to them that the problem was in a fair way of solution, the public was getting more and more hopelessly involved in the mass of stories which were circulated from day to day. The letter which was alleged to have been received by Mrs. Borden on the morning of the tragedy continued to excite public interest. Once a week the New York Journal offered a reward of $500 for the writer of the note, and the Fall River News implored its readers to unite in one effort in the cause of justice, and if possible find the note and deliver it into the editor's hands. The missive, however, was not found. Miss Lizzie A. Borden seemingly put an end to that theory when she told Dr. Dolan that she had attempted to find the note, and being unsuccessful she feared it had been burned in the kitchen stove. Not one of the household seemed to be able to give more than a general idea of the contents of the note. It was from a friend who was ill, but as neither the friend nor the note could be found by the united efforts of the police and members of the family, the matter was dropped early in the investigation. CHAPTER VIII.